Hi, my name is Vineet, and today I'm going to introduce you to LabVIEW NXG. LabVIEW NXG is the brand new software development environment from National Instruments, and you'll see how some of the things are the same in terms of graphical programming and the fundamental ways that you can program with icons and wires, and some things are different in order to make your programming more productive, as we've baked in a lot of new usability features into the development environment itself. So we're going to jump in, take a look at that, and show you how to program a very basic virtual instrument. This is the introductory screen, or the splash screen, or the welcome screen from LabVIEW NXG, and you can have the option to launch a project. This is where this middle part, you can start using your hardware and configure and test out your I/O channels, or you can even take some self-paced tutorials through learning to program. Today we're going to just jump in straight to launching a project, and we're going to see what that looks like. If I click on this option here, I get all the different initial templates that I have available to me. And we're just going to start with just a blank project to see what a very basic beginning looks like. If I click on this blank project option, I have to enter in a project name, which is called this project 1, and hit create. Then it's going to generate the initial state, and right away you might say, where am I? It's a little bit different than what you might be used to, where the initial two windows might pop up and a project window might pop up. In this case, in this new environment, we have new types of things called panes. And so I'm going to, for now, I'm going to minimize the navigation pane. I'm going to minimize this configuration pane. We'll take a look at how they work later on. And I'm just going to go up to File and New VI. Those of you that know LabVIEW will know a virtual instrument, and you might be used to having this interaction between two different panels, the front panel and the block diagram. Well, initially you'll see this white screen here, but in LabVIEW NXG, this is your panel. It's the front panel, but now we just call it a panel. And the corresponding code is on this diagram tab. So you can see this actually takes me to a little bit different look and feel. Same ideas, but might be a little different than what you're used to. If I go back to the panel, on my left-hand side is where I can see all my different UI elements, anything I'd like to be able to interact with, and different ways to display data. And so if I go and I can see the different Boolean buttons, I can drop down a vertical toggle switch as an example and resize that to how I'd like. I can go back and drop down just a round LED. And then I can even go to the string palette and drop down a string control. And let's go ahead and drop down a string indicator. Now if you notice, as I'm moving things around, I get these alignment lines or these smart guides in order to tell me when I'm centered or aligned to something. So I get a little bit of immediate feedback into where I place my UI items. So I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. And you might be noticing this screen on the left, this pane on the left popping in and out. This was the configuration pane. Again, I can minimize it, or I can click on a different object and right-click, and I can go to Properties. And that also then takes me back to this configuration pane. This is where all the different options that I have for that particular UI element exist. And in this case, I can choose to recolor it. Let's make it red as an example. And what's neat is I can group multiple objects, and any of the shared properties then also appear on the configuration pane. So it's convenient to make multiple changes all at once by selecting multiple things. For example, these string boxes, I'm just going to go and I'm going to select for content font. I'm going to go and select a larger font, so it's a little bit easier to read. Let's go with 26 as an example, so then I can type something in. If I have this selected, just type in LabVIEW NXG, as an example. And I've basically set my user interface up pretty easily. So now if I want to go to the block diagram, or just called a diagram, I can come up to this tab and I can click on this button. I can also use what I'm used to as a LabVIEW programmer, Control E. That switches back and forth too, so I'm just going to do that, Control E, and that switches to the next window. And if you notice, you might be asking yourself, where's my icons? So previously, when you drop down items on the front panel, they would automatically populate on the block diagram. Well, in this case, to help keep things a little bit organized, there's a new feature called an unplaced items tray, and I can click on that, and sure enough, here are the different objects that I dropped down previously. So I can then click on each one at a time and drop them down. I can also choose to do multiple ones if I hold the Control key, and then I can go through and I can serially drop them down as I selected them. And naturally, of course, I'm going to wire my switch over to my round LED, and I'm going to wire my string control over to my string indicator. And if I wanted this code to execute continuously, those of you that know LabVIEW know that I would need a loop structure, something to allow me to iteratively execute code. So I can go to the left-hand palette again, and I can choose to go to the program flow palette, and I can navigate to while loop. So that should look familiar to most folks. If I go and drop this down, I've now encapsulated the code that I want to repeat. One other neat new feature in LabVIEW NXG is I can select multiple things and I can do live wiring. So if I bring these terminals outside of the loop, you can see it automatically wires up the loop tunnel. So I can dynamically update things, and it saves me some extra clicks, and it helps me to see what it's gonna eventually wire up to before I let go. It's kind of a nice feature. So lastly, I need to be able to do some kind of loop timing in order to give some idea of how fast I want this loop to execute. And so I can go back to this program flow palette, and I can choose the wait until next multiple function. Those of you that are used to right-clicking, those options still exist. I can also right-click, and I can go again to the same palette, program flow palette, and select the millisecond multiple. So I have both options. So I have the left-hand palette, or I get the right-click menus as well. And over time, you can choose, depending on the situation, which works best for you. This wait until next multiple function needs to have some type of a constant, or something to tell it how long to wait. So I'm just going to create a constant, and I'll type in 100 milliseconds. That's fast enough. That's 10 times a second. That's plenty fast for what I need for my user interface to update in time. And if one nice new feature is if I click on this function, you can see the configuration pane also allows me to configure functions on the diagram. And so just like I have this 100 millisecond multiple here, I can come into here and I can modify any constants to be configured through the right pane as well. So if I increase this number, let's say to 105 milliseconds or 110, well, if you notice, dynamically the diagram is updating. That's kind of neat. I can also, if I know this is not going to change and I only want to see it on the right-hand side, I can dock those constants by clicking on the dock function. And now it cleans up a function that might have a lot of constants. So imagine if you're used to dropping down lots of constants and you want to configure them on diagram, this gives you a more simpler way to group them all at once and not necessarily take up as much space on the diagram, and you can just configure them all in the right configuration pane, and it's pretty convenient. So I'm almost ready to run my code, but if I come up to where I'd find the run button, similar kind of run button is on the top left, but you can see this button is broken. So if I click on it, just like before, I now see my error pane come up, and I can see exactly where I might have some errors. And it looks like I've forgotten to wire my condition terminal for my while loop. If I double click on this, it shows me where that is. So it takes me to this loop condition, and here's where I should have said that I want to have some type of a control there in order to instruct my code when to stop. So now that I've dropped down this control, I can go to my panel, and similarly to before, now my control button is in my unplaced items tray. So I can sort of create things in either direction, and they work the same way. And I can go in and I can drop down this stop button. There we go. So that's my basic LabVIEW NXG program. If I wanted to make more space, I can hold the control key and I can even zoom out. So I get some nice editor features that way too. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use the normal size, the 100%. Here's where I can control zoom. And I can go ahead and hit run. So now if I change my toggle switch, through data flow, it propagates across and it updates my round LED. You can see my text has also been updated. I can change this as well just to test it out. Type in test. If I click outside the box, that gets updated as well. And if I want to end my program, if I'm done, I can just hit the stop button. So that's a very basic introduction to this brand new development environment from National Instruments, LabVIEW NXG. And we'll be doing more tutorials like this to dive into different features and continue to help people learn how to program graphically.